Before Dracula, before the word vampire even existed, there was Lilith, the first wife of Adam, the first rebel, the first monster. Banished from Eden, cursed by God, she became something darker, something hungrier. While Adam and Eve built the world, she lurked in the shadows, her thirst for blood birthing a legend that would haunt humanity forever. This is the story of the first vampire, the one who predates them all, the one they still whisper about in the dead of night, when the air grows cold and the scent of blood lingers on the wind. Ancient myths whisper her name as Adam's forsaken first wife, a demoness who refused to obey. But history hides her darkest secret. She thirsted for blood before vampires even had a name. Before the structured serenity of Eden, before the naming of beasts and the shaping of Eve from Adam's rib, the world was a canvas of primordial forces. Earth, newly separated from the waters, breathed mist and potential. Light warred with an ancient, profound darkness. It was in this nascent world, shaped from the same damp, fertile clay as the first man, that Lilith came into being. She was not an afterthought, not a mere companion, but an equal force, intrinsically linked to the untamed elements, particularly the mysteries of the night, a connection echoed in the very root of her name. Her spirit was fierce, independent, mirroring the wild landscapes she roamed. Some ancient whispers, predating the scrolls of the Hebrews, spoke of her kind, the Lilith of Sumer and Babylon, spirits of the air and night, sometimes beautiful maidens, sometimes winged demons, hinting at a power both innate and potentially perilous. She possessed a connection to the unseen, a resonance with the elements that Adam, tasked with tending a garden, did not share. Adam, formed first, perceived his solitude amidst the paired creatures of the world and desired a mate. When Lilith was formed, equal in substance and spirit, he saw beauty but expected compliance. The conflict arose not from malice, but from a fundamental disagreement on the nature of their creation. Adam, asserting primacy, demanded she lie beneath him during their union, a position of subservience. Lilith, however, recognized no such hierarchy. "We are equal, for we are both made from the earth," she declared, refusing to accept a position she deemed an insult to her very being, akin to the lesser beasts bound to the soil while divine beings soared above. This refusal, this assertion of self against the imposed order, became the unpardonable act. Accounts vary in the apocryphal shadows. Some speak of Adam's force, others merely of irreconcilable wills. But the outcome remains constant. Lilith, in defiance or desperation, uttered the sacred, ineffable name of the Creator, a power not meant for mortal tongues. In that moment, the bond to the nascent order of Eden, or perhaps the divine presence itself, shattered. She was flung, or perhaps flew on newly formed, shadowy wings, from the place of creation. Her path led away from the light, towards the desolate wilderness, perhaps near the shimmering, boundary-blurring waters of the Red Sea, a region already associated in burgeoning human consciousness with exile and restless, dangerous spirits. This act of rebellion, born from a demand for equality, set a precedent echoed in countless tales of the ostracized and the cursed. Lilith's journey was not initially one of inherent evil, but her choice to defy the established order, whether divine or patriarchal, initiated a profound transformation. Her story suggests that the archetype of the vampire, the creature existing outside accepted norms, finds its roots not merely in death, but in defiance. Furthermore, her origins, traceable to Mesopotamian figures like the Lilitu, Ekimu, and Utuku, spirits often associated with the night, misfortune, and sometimes draining life, indicate that the concept of the life-consuming entity predates later monotheistic interpretations, having been absorbed and reshaped over time. Her narrative is inextricably linked with concepts of female power and autonomy, and the subsequent fear and demonization such independence often provoked in patriarchal societies, foreshadowing the complex interplay of gender, power, and the monstrous seen in later vampire lore. Part 1. The transformation in the wilderness. Cast out, Lilith wandered the liminal spaces where the structured world bled into chaos. Isolation became her companion, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through barren rocks and the cries of unseen desert creatures. Here, the consequences of her defiance began to manifest, not as a single, swift punishment, but as a creeping alteration of her very essence. Rage at her perceived betrayal, grief for the lost equality, and the profound severing from the source of divine light festered within her. Her connection to the night deepened, no longer just an affinity but her sole refuge, her defining element. Some legends whisper that the Creator, angered by her continued defiance, and perhaps her consorting with other exiled spirits, enacted a terrible price, the daily destruction of the demonic offspring, the Lilith, she bore in the wilderness, fueling an eternal cycle of loss and vengeance within her. This perpetual grief and rage warped her spirit, twisting her into something new, something predatory. It began subtly, a gnawing emptiness that mirrored the desolation around her. Food offered no sustenance. Water turned to dust in her mouth, reminiscent of the curses later attributed to Cain. A new hunger awoke, a craving not for fruit or grain, but for something vital, something intrinsic to life itself. Perhaps initially, it was the raw life force, the animating energy, the chi spoken of in Eastern traditions, that she drew from the desperate fauna of the wasteland. This act, a parasitic inversion of life-giving, resonated darkly with her own rejected potential for motherhood. Some tales even claiming her breasts now produced blood, not milk. Soon, she discovered the intoxicating potency of human vitality, the life essence carried within the blood. This discovery might have been accidental, a desperate act in the throes of her transformation, or a deliberate turn towards the lineage of Adam and Eve, the source of her perceived wrongs. The blood of infants, tragically, held a particular draw, a horrific echo of her own lost children, and the vow some legends claim she made to prey upon the newborns of humanity. Thus, the first, myth one, blood dependency was born, not necessarily from undeath, but from a cursed vitality needing to consume other life to sustain itself. This focus on life essence, later centering on blood, reflects the diverse nature of sustenance found in vampire folklore globally, where the core element is parasitic need, not always literal hematophagy. With this transformation came another realization, colder and more profound than the hunger. The natural cycle of decay and return to the earth no longer applied to her. She did not age, wounds closed with unnatural speed. She was caught in an eternal present, her transformed state immutable. This was not the gift of everlasting life, but myth 2, immortality as a curse, an unending exile in her monstrous form, forever barred from the peace of oblivion or reunification with the divine source. She became a being trapped between worlds, neither fully alive in the mortal sense nor truly dead, an immortal spirit bound to a corrupted physical or quasi-physical form. Unlike the later Slavic tales of revenants clawing their way from graves, Lilith's origin is one of metamorphosis. Her vampirism stemmed from the alteration of her existing, perhaps inherently powerful or spiritual, nature due to divine judgment and her own choices, distinguishing her path from those who returned from biological death. Part 2. First steps in eternal night. Her existence became intrinsically tied to the absence of the sun. The first dawn after her full transformation brought agony unlike any physical pain she had known before. The light, symbolic of the divine grace she had forfeited, seared her skin, driving her into the deepest shadows. This, myth 3, sunlight vulnerability, wasn't necessarily the instantaneous incineration depicted in later fictions like Nosferatu, but a profound, unbearable torment that enforced a nocturnal existence. It was a physical manifestation of her spiritual state. Exiled from the light, bound to the darkness she was now intrinsically part of. This vulnerability, echoed in the curses laid upon Cain and Judas in other origin myths, became a defining characteristic, forcing her kind into the shadows. Her appearance shifted, reflecting her inner change. The vibrant life that once colored her earthly form leached away, replaced by a pallor born of darkness and the constant drain on her own vitality. Her features might have sharpened, her nails elongating into talons, and as blood became her primary sustenance, myth 4, fangs emerged, not merely as teeth, but as instruments perfectly suited for her new existence. Yet, drawing on her ancient Lilith aspect as the beautiful maiden, she likely retained the ability to cloak her monstrousness in alluring forms, a seductive mask to draw prey near, embodying the repulsive sexiness noted even in later figures like Dracula. Her true form, however, glimpsed in moments of rage or feeding, might have been closer to the hideous winged demon described in some texts, reflecting the monstrous features seen in diverse vampire lore, like the half-bat Beetle or the iron-toothed Asan Bosum. Driven by the agonizing sun and a primal need for security, Lilith sought refuge during the day. Predating cemeteries and coffins, her sanctuaries were the deep, untouched places of the earth, lightless caverns, forgotten ruins, places resonant with the primordial darkness and the raw earth from which she was formed. This instinctual seeking of deep, dark earthen shelters explains the later association of vampires with graves and, myth 5, coffins, and the belief that some require their native soil. For Lilith, it wasn't about a specific burial plot, but a connection to the untamed foundational earth, a retreat into the planet's oldest shadows. One twilight, catching her image in the still surface of a hidden pool, she saw not the face she once knew, but nothing. Or perhaps, worse than nothing, a fleeting, distorted visage, monstrous and alien. The water, reflecting the natural world, refused to acknowledge her altered state. This horrifying discovery became the basis for myth 6, the lack of reflection. It was a potent symbol of her detachment from the natural order, the loss of her original self, her soul's profound alteration. She was no longer part of the world, the mirror showed. This characteristic, like others, might not have been an absolute rule from the start, but a gradual fading as her transformation solidified, a visual representation of her deepening alienation. Much of what became codified as vampire rules likely stemmed from frightened human observation, and attempts to rationalize the unnatural fleeting glimpses of her speed might lead to claims she cast no shadow or reflection, her retreats into ancient tombs misinterpreted as rising from graves. Folklore thus began weaving explanations from fear and fragmented perception. Part 3. Whispers among mortals, wards against the night. Driven by the gnawing hunger and perhaps a twisted echo of longing for vengeance against Adam's descendants, or simply for the life she could now only steal, Lilith began to encroach upon the burgeoning settlements of early humanity. Her appearances were specters of terror. Sometimes she came as a seductress, a beautiful nightmare fulfilling the warnings whispered about the succubus, draining vitality through perilous intimacy. Other times, her attacks were brutally direct, marked by a chilling preference for the most vulnerable, newborn infants. This horrific predilection was woven into her very legend, tied to the curse that supposedly claimed her own demonic children, fueling a vengeful cycle against the progeny of Eve. Faced with this nocturnal terror, desperate humans sought protection. They experimented with the natural world, seeking wards against the unnatural. They discovered that certain plants, pungent and full of Earth's vitality, seemed to cause the Night Stalker distress. Perhaps, myth 7, garlic, with its strong odor and association with folk remedies, or branches of wild rose or hawthorn, symbols of life and protection in some traditions, acted as painful reminders of the vibrant, natural world Lilith had lost. Alternatively, these plants may have been believed to hold inherent protective qualities or be associated with benevolent spirits antithetical to her demonic nature, a concept aligning with her later associations with witchcraft. Early forms of faith provided another defense. Rudimentary holy symbols, carvings invoking protective spirits, or the chanting of divine names, perhaps even the name she herself had used to break away, seemed to cause her anguish. This, myth 8, Repulsion by holy symbols wasn't necessarily about the object itself, but the power it represented, the divine authority she had defied. The reaction stemmed from spiritual and psychological torment, a raw nerve exposed by the reminder of her rebellion and exile. The specific fear of the Christian crucifix would arise much later, but the principle of aversion to symbols of antagonistic divine power began here. Humans also observed strange limitations to her power. She seemed unable, or unwilling, to cross the threshold of a dwelling unbidden. This led to the belief that, Myth 9, an invitation was needed. This rule resonates with ancient folklore concerning spirits and boundaries, the sanctity of the home as a protected space that requires permission to enter, even for powerful entities. It might have been a lingering constraint of the divine laws she fled, a subtle boundary she could not fully transgress, adding a layer of terrifying complicity to her predation. Another natural barrier seemed to thwart her. Myth 10, running water. Rivers and streams, symbols of life, purity, and constant movement, formed boundaries she could not easily cross. As a creature transformed by darkness and stagnation, the dynamic, life-affirming energy of flowing water might have been inherently painful or acted as a potent natural ward, separating the domain of the living from her shadowy existence. One of the most peculiar defenses discovered was Myth 11, the counting compulsion. If small objects like seeds or grains were scattered in her path, she would be inexplicably compelled to stop and count each one. This bizarre behavior finds a tragic potential origin in the legends of her lost children. The curse that reportedly destroyed 100 of her Lilith offspring each day could have inflicted a deep psychological scar, a maddening obsessive need to account for innumerable lost things. The scattered seeds became a trigger, forcing her into a futile act of counting that mirrored the endless tally of her grief and punishment. These developing wards and perceived weaknesses reflect a fundamental aspect of folklore, the attempt to impose order on chaos and fear. By identifying patterns, real or perceived, in Lilith's behavior and limitations, communities created a framework for understanding and potentially surviving the terror she represented. Garlic, holy symbols, running water, the threshold rule. These became tools, elements of folk logic using symbols of purity, divinity, life, and boundaries to repel a creature seen as their antithesis. The myths served not only as warnings but also as strategies, giving people a sense of agency against the overwhelming dread inspired by the first vampire, shaping the narrative of the monster through society's need to control its fear. Part 4. The monster's legacy. Lilith's nature, rooted in the Lilith spirits and warped by her curse, likely granted her unsettling abilities beyond simple predation. Legends arose of her changing form, becoming, Myth 12, able to transform. She might melt into shadows, assume the guise of alluring strangers, or unleash her inner monstrosity by taking the shape of fearsome beasts, perhaps creatures of the night like great bats, giving rise to later associations or other animals feared by local populations. This shape-shifting made her an even more elusive and terrifying predator, blurring the lines between human, demon, and beast. Stopping such a creature seemed almost impossible, but desperate humans sought methods rooted in ancient practices for dealing with powerful, malevolent entities. Myth 13. Methods of destruction evolved from these attempts. Impalement, perhaps initially with any sharpened object, later codified as a wooden stake, sometimes of specific woods like hawthorn or ash, resonant with protective magic, was thought to pin the creature's spirit to the earth, preventing its escape or reanimation. Decapitation offered a more certain end, separating the animating consciousness, believed to reside in the head, from the body. Fire, the ultimate purifier across many cultures, aimed to utterly consume the physical form, leaving nothing for the spirit to inhabit. These violent methods targeted the physical vessel or sought to bind or destroy the powerful corrupted spirit within, reflecting deep-seated cultural beliefs about death, the soul, and the neutralization of profound evil. Did Lilith walk her eternal path alone? Some legends state her offspring were the Lilim, demonic beings born from her unions with other spirits in the wilderness. These were inherently non-human. However, the pervasive myth of vampirism spreading like a contagion suggests another possibility. Perhaps Lilith discovered, or chose to, myth 14, create others in her image not through birth but through corruption. The vampire's bite, in this context, becomes more than feeding. It's a violation that drains the victim's life and soul, replacing it with a shard of her own cursed essence, possibly transmitted through her blood, which some myths claimed her body now produced. This process, echoed in later vampire lore like the Embrace, transforms a mortal into a creature like herself, bound to the night and the thirst. This act of propagation serves as a powerful metaphor for the spread of corruption, whether physical disease, like the plagues often associated with vampire panics, or spiritual decay, the infectious nature of rebellion against the divine or natural order. Thus, Lilith's shadow stretched long across the ages. She became an archetype, the first rebel, the mother of demons, the original nocturnal predator whose story, though often obscured or fragmented, laid the foundation for millennia of vampire lore. While countless variations would arise across the globe, the Slavic Upir and Strigoi, the Greek Vrikolakas, the Chinese Jiangxi, the literary figures of Carmilla and Dracula, many carried echoes of her original transgression, her curse, and the fears she embodied. The modern vampire is a complex tapestry woven from diverse threads: ancient Mesopotamian demons, Eastern European revenant folklore, literary romanticism and horror, misunderstandings of disease and decomposition, and even distorted history. Lilith, in this telling, represents one of the oldest and most potent of those threads. Perhaps she still wanders the desolate places, an eternal testament to the price of defiance and the enduring power of myth. Her legend serves as a dark mirror, reflecting humanity's deepest fears about rebellion, sexuality, the night, and the consuming nature of life, feeding on life.